So we're going to start with the admissions director panel, and if I can welcome onto the stage, here they all are, ready, lined up.
Enjoy, everyone, and thank you for coming.
And it's, Jim, it's like a wedding. We're doing boy, girl, boy, girl. So as we said, CentreCourt really is about finding out about the right programs for you, but also improving your chances in what can be a very, very selective admissions process. And with so many of the top schools with us that receive many more thousands of applications than places that they have available in the program. So I feel blessed to have such a well-qualified panel sharing this with me. Starting to my immediate left, Shari Hubert, who is the Associate Dean of Admissions of Duke, the Fuqua School of Business. Shari, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much, Matt.
And they build them tall in the UK, right, David? Our tallest panelist is David Simpson, who is the head of MBA admissions, well, both MBA and the Masters in Finance at the London Business School. David, welcome.
Thanks, Matt.
Kristen, you may have travelled the shortest distance to join us. Kristen is the Associate Director of Admissions at MIT Sloan, so you jumped on your bicycle, jumped on the bus.
I wish it was that easy.
And here you are. And a little further away, Jim Holman, the Director of Admissions and Financial Aid at Indiana Kelley. So a great panel, a lot of experience. And if we think that your answers are too vague or too soft, then we'll ask the question again and try and really dig deep. I guess what we wanted to start with was just a sense of where we are in admissions. We sort of hear these stories about, rising application volumes, falling numbers from the international market, many different things. Shari, perhaps just starting with you in terms of, what you're seeing in terms of admissions this year.
Sure, thanks, Matt. And hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Looking forward to getting to know you better. I think it's been up and down. I think for us, it's been strong in terms of our current domestic volume. The international volume has been a little flat, and I think with a lot of the rhetoric and noise that we've heard from a political perspective, I think that has caused some concern from certain folks from certain countries. And so we've really worked hard to try and make sure that we're sending out communications to our international students across various countries to say, hey, we're open, we're welcoming, these are the resources that we will provide you should you decide to come to study in the U.S. Not only is it the U.S. still a great place to study, but in particular our school at Fuqua has lots of resources too. So I would say mixed bag, but we're still very optimistic, and we look forward and are expecting a really strong class coming in. We're still in the midst of closing the class. We haven't yet finished. Our orientation starts August 1st, and so we are looking forward to welcoming a great group, but we're still kind of, making the class.
Right. Shari raises the spectre of politics, David, which wasn't usually a discussion in an admissions panel, but something's been happening in the UK in the last couple of years. I'm not
what's
sure.
That, Matt? Yeah. With Brexit and any political situation in any country, I think you think about what you have to do next to be a step ahead of that, and that's being able to deal with ambiguity and preparing yourself for what might come next. We've seen a stack of things like all of the old schools come through with a global financial crisis and .com bust and boom and bust, and so this is another one of those for us. And in some ways, I think it's going to provide some great opportunities. We will need, in the UK, highly talented migrants. That's what business schools do. So I don't want to say it too loud because my personal feelings towards Brexit, aren't positive, but professionally, I think there comes some interesting opportunities there.
Right. It's sad that both of us remember the .com bubble and its impact on admissions. We've been doing this for
I'm showing my age, yeah.
There is still this reality, of course, coming out of one of the top business schools, tremendous return on investment, and that's certainly something that you see at MIT Sloan, Kristen.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think in terms of trends and mentioning politics as well, that there's a shift in individuals who want to make a difference and get involved in public policy, and they see the MBA as a way of getting that return in a greater way, of not just for themselves but for the world at large. So kind of following up on what David was mentioning, that there are a lot of opportunities for individuals to take advantage of the MBA and use it in a way that maybe they wouldn't have thought of previously. And our political situation is really creating that opportunity for more of these non-traditional candidates to utilize the MBA and move it in a completely different direction.
Right. Jim, of course, the full-time MBA is still the flagship for the business schools, but we're also seeing a shift in the offering, right, in terms of specialized masters and the online MBA that is really coming of age, and that's something that Kelley can speak to.
Sure. We do offer a strong online MBA program and a number of especially master's programs, and interest in those programs has remained strong through all of this. I represent our full-time program, and we have seen a slight decline in applications the last 2 years. However, we have seen stronger than usual yield, and so both last year and we're on target this year for surpassing our enrollment goals. So those students who are applying, they recognize that even in times of political uncertainty, and we've seen it in times of economic uncertainty as well, spending 2 years getting the MBA, you're going to be in a much stronger position in 2 years, regardless of what the political or economic outcome is. And in all likelihood, hopefully it will be even better, and then they will be well placed for the opportunities that will be there.
Right. Whatever the markets might do, trade wars, different parts of the world, ultimately investing in yourself is one of the smartest paths to take. Yeah. Now, you'd imagine in an admissions panel at some point we're going to have to talk about the Gmat, and Sherry's actually volunteered to answer the question about the Gmat. I think that's the first person that has put herself forward for that, but that's going to come a little later on.
I hope I don't regret it.
Because with the sort of breadth of experience on the stage here, we wanted to sort of pull back the curtain and understand the admissions process. As you identify your deadlines, the different areas that you're looking for. So, Kristen, can you sort of walk us through a day in the life of the Sloan admissions office?
Absolutely. So for us at Sloan, we do not review any applications until after the deadline has passed, and that day after the deadline is an extremely busy day for us. There are many eyes that look at every single application that comes through our application portal. So we start off just by reviewing everything and being able to give it out to our admissions committee to read. That committee is made up of only professionally trained admissions committee members, no faculty, no staff, no current students are involved in that process. And they are trained to really look for what makes a strong Sloan applicant. For us, that really falls into two categories. One we like to think of as demonstrated success, so things like your career progression, your test scores, your academic background, and then also leadership attributes, so things like your ability to work on a team, your ability to think outside the box, your ability to put forth your idea and kind of stand your ground, but at the same time understand how to take others' perceptions and their backgrounds into consideration. So our readers are going through those applications. It takes us about 5 to 6 weeks to read through them. We also meet on a weekly basis to calibrate, and oftentimes we will all look at the same applications or several applications and get a sense of what do we all think. Let's look at it as an entire committee instead of an individual. After that 5 to 6 week period, when all of the reading files come back to us, then we meet as a smaller committee, more of a leadership admissions committee, to make our interview decisions, looking at what the readers have recommended to us. Do we agree? What is our interview capacity looking like? Usually we're going over that capacity and adding in extra slots because there are really so many of you that are so strong that we're willing to add some extra time in to meet with you. And then we invite you to an interview. Usually it is an in-person interview. We travel to about 15 hub cities, so we try to invite a candidate to the city that is nearest to where we happen to be and give you at least 1 week notice. We, again, interview using professional admissions committee members, so you're meeting with a member of our trained staff, having a behavioral interview looking at the same kind of competencies that I mentioned before. And then, again, a leadership admissions committee meeting follows that interview period where we look through what the interviewers have had to say, what did the reader have to say, and start to make those final decisions.
Right. You talk about a sort of professionally trained staff, Kristen, just to give us a sense, as you look at patterns of leadership or these different qualities that emerge, how many applications might one of the team be reading every day, and just that degree of experience that you have?
Absolutely. So I would say our committee, each member would read at least 50 applications in any given week.
50?
Yes.
Right. And do you do it thematically, looking at everyone in investment banking, everyone that's working in the tech industry, or it's an eclectic mix?
It is an eclectic mix. They're pretty randomly assigned. I would say mostly the only factor that comes into play for us would be our interview travel. So if we have a city that we're happening to have some other reason to travel to earlier on in the process, we might look at everyone who has chosen that interview city as the location where they would like to meet us first, so that we've done all the reading on that. We try to look at all of those interview decisions, as I said, together. So most of the reading is done by the time we even make an interview decision on a candidate, but that might be a prioritization for us.
Right, right. Now, David, with the front entrance of London Business School, just down to the left, you have your own pub, don't you? The Windsor pub. Is that where you make all of your admissions decisions?
So many stereotypes in the introduction carried forwards. No. We do have a pub attached to the school. We have lots of things attached to the school. No, with us, it's fairly similar. Professional admissions staff, reviewing applications. We actually use our alumni to interview all around the world with a very global applicant body. So we will have somebody local to you wherever you are interview, so they have an extra set of knowledge. They've also been through the program, so they have a big stake in who comes next. That interview will take place, their details sent back, and then we'll reassess. As well as the one-to-one alumni interview, we also use a video interview as well. Again, that's to provide the consistency when you have 500 alumni interviewers, to bring it back a step to say, now let's look at everybody before we offer places. It works very well as a package. It's time-consuming, it's very thorough. You should all feel confident that a lot of due diligence has been put into assessing your applications. We care very much about making the right decisions. So it's thorough, it's quite long, takes some time, but it takes some time because it's so thorough.
Right, and you're happy with introducing this video element? You find that it's really offering an additional sort of window of insight into the applicant?
Yeah, for us, we use it when people have been selected for interview. Some schools use it up front for every applicant. For us, it just adds an extra layer. We're very careful because there's obvious elements that you could be accused of bias by looking at it. For us, because we're just using it for people who are selected to interview, they all seem to be pretty good. And we have years of experience on international recruiting, so we know what we might expect from around the world, from people with different experience as well. If you're a front office person who's used to working with clients and being super confident, then we're going to expect you to do quite well compared to somebody who perhaps is doing an MBA to bring them out into that arena. But it just adds a little flavour, a little colour to an applicant.
Right. Jim, you talked about yield, which also implies you really looking beyond academic excellence, strong test scores, the professional fast track that applicants are on, that sort of alignment with the school and its culture and the offers that you're then making. So as you look at the holistic admissions process, where does that sense of fit and alignment really come into it?
Sure. Well, when we are looking at a candidate, we are looking for fit just as candidates should be looking for the program that's the right fit for them. The culture, the learning styles, the community of alumni. And so one of the really most important aspects of the application process for us beyond the information that they share is the interview that we've been talking about, because I think often when you're sitting down with a candidate and they are presenting themselves, presenting information about their interest, their goals, their career dreams, you really are beginning to get a sense of who they are, what they bring to the table, what they are looking for. Are they going to be interested in working in a team-based collaborative environment, or are they more interested in working independently? We're looking at their self-awareness, their social awareness, their emotional intelligence, because the task of an admissions team is imagining the candidate the next year sitting down in front of a recruiter representing not only themselves, but in our case representing the Kelley School. And we have to take a look at where they are now and the potential they are demonstrating, coupled with what I know they're going to get in the Kelley program. Can those two pieces come together so that when they're sitting there, they're making everyone proud?
Right. Sherry, you obviously have all of this information about applicants, but Fuqua has one of my favorite questions. Tell us 25 random things about you. How does that then sort of influence the admissions process with the sort of insights that can generate?
Yeah, so I actually went through that process and filled out my own top 25 as well when I was going through the interview process to join Fuqua. And it really is something that we all embrace at Fuqua, the staff, the faculty, the students. And it really gives us a sense, another perspective, right? So in the application process, we see all of your quantitative and academic attributes. We see your work and career and professional attributes, but this gives us a real good insight into who are you, what's your personality, what do you care about, where you come from, right? What makes you uniquely you, and what are you passionate about? And so those are the things that for us are very important, right? There is a question, I think, that one of the audience members submitted around what's unique and what makes each school unique. And for us, what we're looking for and why we feel like we're unique is we're looking for individuals with, who are humble. Well, let me give you this example. So we just went through a rebranding exercise at the school last year, and the branding firm that we use interviewed our alumni, staff, students to say, okay, what's this essence of Team Fuqua, and how would you describe it? What are the words that we use to describe the culture? And what the 4 words that came up unanimously across the board were driven, humble, grit, and guess what the 4th one was? Happy. Right? So and you don't really associate that normally with an MBA program, but our students are happy. And that really is what we really want to make sure. When we think about Team Fuqua, we want to make sure that folks are enjoying their transformation, enjoying the experience, but also showing up, being accountable, and also thinking of others. And so it's all about the other in terms of how do you move a team forward. Our dean, Bill Boulding, has now started to really embrace this notion of DQ. So in addition to the IQ, the EQ, there's this decency quotient that we talk about. And that's really important to us. And that's really, I think, also at the core of Team Fuqua. It's not just about how smart are you or, how articulate, communicative are you, but it's also about how decent, how much empathy do you have for others? How do you care about and support your teammates and your classmates as you're going through this transformation together? And that will make you as an individual stronger, your team stronger, but the class stronger, the school stronger, and then that, in part, adds value to your brand and to your degree, right?
So in October, when Shari's reading applications and the first 5 random things all talk about being driven, grit, humility, happy, she's like, yeah, Boston. But you did hear it here first. I guess for all of you, you've seen such a breadth of applications. If you had one piece, well, actually, let me just find out who's looking to apply this year to start business school next year. All right, so, wow, that's a lot of people. So the one piece of advice, and of course, whoever I ask to go first, you have open, free range. Kristen, what would be your one piece of advice?
Well, I think that it builds on what you mentioned earlier about fit. And every school is unique, and the best way to learn about the school is to go and visit. And I know that's not easy. They're not necessarily all located in the same place. You're not all located in Boston, so it's a challenge, but it's worth your time to do that. Fit is kind of a cliched word, but it includes so many things, not only the size of the program, the method of teaching in the program, but the culture, what the students are like, what the faculty are like. And you can listen to us talk, and you can read our websites, and maybe talk to some alums or some current students, but I think it's meaningful to put yourself in the position as if you were living the day in the life of a student. Most schools, if not all, offer a class visit and lunch with students or an info session or a coffee chat, and the ability to be on campus and really get that experience and ask yourself, can I see myself here? And that's going to go a long way in helping you make the right choice for you, and to really also help you in the application process to get a better understanding of what is this school all about, what are they really looking for, how can I best represent myself to show that I am what they're looking for.
Right, it's a great place to start. Jim, what would you add to that?
Well, as difficult as this may be to do, don't overthink the process, because you will stand out by being authentic. Shari's example at Duke is a great one, and I suspect that someone, they're coming up with their list of 25 interesting things, will probably think so hard and try to figure out what would a Duke admissions committee want to read. It's like, I am good at spreadsheets and this and... But the person who probably goes in there and stream of conscious comes up with a list that helps us really get to know you, that's going to stand out. I know that if you're applying to multiple schools and each school may have 2 or 3 essays, it can be overwhelming and sometimes even paralyzing when you're looking at all this information you have to present. And one piece of advice I sometimes share, when you're writing that first draft, don't write it for us. Don't picture an admissions committee at the other end reading that. Imagine if you were asked the very same question by your best friend or maybe even a family member. I bet it would be a pretty easy answer or question to answer. But as soon as you think that you're answering the question for an admissions committee, the question all of a sudden seems bigger than it needs to be. So my suggestion is, again, be authentic. Write your essay to friends and family, then clean it up for us. But that may be a good way to get started.
Sherry was so authentic in her 25 random things that they can't be published publicly.
They are published.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys can all go online and see them.
Great.
But don't copy her list.
What would you
So I would say be honest with yourself. Be careful of falling into the hubris trap. You know, I talk a lot about being a little bit of dose of humility is good in this process because it keeps you honest. It allows you to recognize your Achilles heel. And then if you recognize your Achilles heel, if you're more introspective as part of this process, you will be able to be honest with yourself and share those things that you don't know yet, right? Because you're not, coachable. You're going to business school to learn and to grow and develop. So we don't expect for you to be perfect coming in. And those people who are a bit more vulnerable, have a bit more humility, are open to letting us know what areas that they perhaps have failed in the past, but then have grown from it. Those are folks that are really interesting to us, and we really feel like they're going to get the most out of business school, and they're in the right frame of mind and maturity level to understand that they don't know what they don't know yet, right? And this is an opportunity for transformation. So you definitely want to be confident and talk about what great things you have to bring to the table, but also be very self-aware about those areas that you need to still work on and shore up. And not only are you need to be able to demonstrate those areas and throughout the application process, right? But you also need to know and be willing and open to work on those areas throughout those 2 years. That's what the transformation is really about.
David, it was always going to be tough to ask this question at last, right?
I think a lot's been said there. For me, I'd take it a step back further, right to the very start, to your reflection point, which becomes before your research point. Don't sleepwalk into business education. Even if it's the well-trodden path at your company or industry, you need to think about why are you doing this and who are you doing it for? And the answers need to be, I'm doing this for my long-term future, and it's for me and those around me, family or whatever. So get to know yourself first, ask others, do a mini kind of personal 360 so you know who you are and what others see in you, and that will help you to prepare for telling your story to us. But lots of these points resonated in terms of being authentic, learn a lot about us, but make sure it's you talking about you to us without sort of like trying to twist it and bend it to fit to us. Because we see thousands of applications and we have to dig underneath to get to the people who make the final class. So the best way to do that is for you to get straight into the personal stuff of what makes you you.
It's interesting that you talk about a community. I'm often struck that whether it's through the rankings or even the schools themselves, you all publish a class profile, which can be very reductive because it says, average Gmat score is 690 or 709 or 723, whatever it might be. It talks about GPA averages, and it talks about 27 and a half years old, 28 years old, and might lead people to the idea, well, unless I have that Gmat score, that GPA, and I'm exactly that age, either I'm perfect for school or not. But it's so much broader than that. Now, Sherry, the idea of either being younger than the class average or in fact being older than the class average, there's room for everybody, right?
Absolutely, Matt. I totally believe that. So I've seen students who are, early 20s, right? Maybe only a couple of years, 2 to 3 years of experience, but have done so much in their careers, have had such great impact either from a social impact perspective or have started really cool businesses, right? Or have done something that really allows them to grow and develop in a way that perhaps their peers in the same age hasn't. And so for them, they're ready to take the next step. They're mature enough. I think, you do need to have enough experiences, regardless of the age, to be able to contribute something, right? In business schools, it's all of our business schools. It's all about, what are you learning from each other? How are you leveraging your experiences to apply to analyze a case or to analyze, a business problem? And so you have to have enough of that, right, regardless of your age, to be able to contribute. On the flip side, if you have a lot of experience, you have to ask yourself, what's the value that I'm going to get from an MBA? Are there other formats that perhaps I should consider, right? Is it in the executive format? Is it a part-time format? So I think, and it may be the 2-year format, but you've got to be realistic and understand what that program offers and what you're looking to get out of it to say, is that trade-off worth it, right? And you remember 2 years opportunity costs those 2 years. If you've got a lot of experience already coming in, that opportunity cost might not be worth it for you, and you can still get the value of an MBA in a very different way.
Perhaps just one thought for the European business schools where typically the class age average trends a little older. That also reflects academic studies and various different aspects. Can you be too old to apply for an MBA, David?
It would be illegal for me to say yes, you can be too old. So, no, I think it is about, we talk about fit for a school, as in you and your personal background, your personality and how you fit. But, I mean, we have a portfolio of programs at London Business School to suit people at different career stages. So either early careers, typical mid-MBA, and right through to senior leadership programs. I think really it's a case of finding one that suits you best, rather than trying to say, I must get into this one. We develop those different programs for good reason, which is to look after people when they've been through certain journeys so far in their career. Saying that, the range within the classes is vast. Now, I'm perfectly happy to have people who are 2 years out of the program if they've been doing something extraordinary already and they have personal maturity and are able to reflect in a way that's way beyond their years, so the number doesn't count too much. And the same at the other end, if you've got bags of experience, as long as you've progressed at a level that ties in with your experience, if you want to be surrounded by people who have a little less but perhaps offer things that you don't have in terms of they look more like your customer base than you, fine, as long as your aspirations, especially professional aspirations, fit with what's possible. So it's a case of learning who the recruiters are, who the students are, where do I best fit. And sometimes if people apply and we don't think that they're right for this program but they're right for another, we'll help you to do that. We won't just cut you off and call it quits there. We'll say you should take a look at this program here. So if they're a finance specialist who want to stay in finance, maybe we'll ask you to take a look at our Masters in Finance program. We're there to sort of partner in that decision. We'd rather we did that before you applied. That's why we have a recruitment team. But we can do it through the journey as well.
Right, and you're also one of the schools with the Sloan Fellows program, which is for slightly more senior. Well, with MIT, you both have a Sloan one-year program for sort of mid-30s and onwards, right?
But I would say, Matt, to your point, David, many of these programs, especially at the executive level, are blending, in terms of their age ranges, and they're becoming broader. So if you think about the workforces that you are in, they're intergenerational, right? They span all different types of generations. And so, sometimes it's not so bad to have individuals in the same cohort who have different experiences in terms of their number of years of experience. At Fuqua, we actually have one of our global executive MBA programs is that it's 5 years to 25 plus. And part of the value is this reverse mentoring that, folks who are millennials or Gen Zers are providing to folks who are Gen Xers or Gen Yers or, baby boomers still in the workforce. And so I think there's less of this age range, this experience range is only this kind of a program. Figure out the program that's best for you, as David was saying, and what you want to get out of it, right?
Right, great. Last year at CentreCourt, we had a Berkeley graduate who'd moved to Bhutan to work in a hazelnut farm, and now applying to business school. But you don't see many of them. You see many more bankers, you see many more consultants, software engineers, increasingly healthcare management. Now, how does that sort of well-represented profile, Kristen, stand out in an applicant pool, if you're at one of the bankers, consultants, or the well-represented groups?
Absolutely. Well, I think the word we've said numerous times is authenticity and being authentic. And you don't want to put yourself in the box. So don't write your cover letter if you're applying to Sloan and only talk about putting yourself into that category. You want to think of yourself as an individual. And I really love your example of the 25 facts about you, because I think you need to look at each school's application and find the opportunity to set yourself apart and talk about you. At Sloan, we're doing a 1-minute video statement, and it's an introduction to your future classmates. And it's just meant to have you talk to the camera. We don't want you to use flashy editing or have a produced video production for us. We just want it to be about you. And the perfect opportunity to really not stand in front of the camera with a suit on and reiterate what's on your resume. It's the opportunity to tell us what can we not glean from those other parts of the application that might be more professionally focused and might put you in a box. This is that out of the box. This is me as an individual. This is what I would want my class to know about me. Use your judgment. Obviously, we want you to still remember this is a professional application, so you might not want to go too far down the casual route. But each application, I think, has a place to showcase that other side of yourself. So it's about really understanding the application and understanding each school and finding that opportunity, whether it's 25 random facts or a video statement, and using it to your advantage to showcase that other side.
Right. So Jim, if we've got talented individual from Deloitte, one of the big four, someone else from JP Morgan, someone from one of the tech giants, that's not enough, just the company name. What you're then trying to sort of uncover is what they've done in that period of tenure with the company, right?
Sure. I mean, whether someone has worked at Deloitte or whether someone was a teacher or someone was a Peace Corps volunteer. One of my favorite students was a successful working actor for 7 years before joining us at the Kelley School. The last 3 years before joining us at Kelley for the MBA, he was in the cast of Mamma Mia on Broadway, singing and dancing 8 shows a week. And he decided he wanted to become a banker, because that makes sense.
I love it.
But if you look at the Broadway actor, the consultant, the engineer, they were all able to identify accomplishments. They were all able to talk about ways they had an impact in their career. They were all able to demonstrate quantitative skills and academic potential. And they all had future goals where an MBA made sense. And so really, again, it's not about the brand name of the company, the traditional or non-traditional nature of your experience. You just take whatever you've done and figure out, how has it prepared you? What will you be able to contribute to your classmates and in the classroom? What are the transferable skills? How have you left that organization a better place? And those are the things that will help you stand out. We certainly like the people from Deloitte and from the premier companies, but we love people with different backgrounds as well.
Yeah. I'd love to have seen the look on the faces of your colleagues when they heard ABBA coming out of one of the interview rooms.
Well, I suspect that some of the banks that interviewed him initially because it's like, we've got to figure out what this guy is doing.
Right.
Because he certainly didn't have a banker's resume.
Right. So take the actor, take the individual that did psych or international relations. There's not a lot of quant on their transcripts. The Gmat can then play a role to demonstrate to all of you that they can handle discounted cash flow and some of the core course. Sherry, of course, you volunteered to ask the question about the importance of the Gmat or the GRE in this whole process. And this other idea, is there a minimum score that you're looking for?
Okay, so I know the question is the importance of the Gmat, but my answer is going to be, we're going to start off by saying that the Gmat is not going to make or break your success in an MBA program. It's not going to make or break your success in your career or life, right? And so it is one data point only that we use. And, it's a little bit of this double-edged sword, right? So at an individual level, it really does help us understand your quantitative aptitude, but it's really just for that first year, specifically for those first-year core quant courses. At the aggregate level, it is important as well, as we look to craft the class, that our averages, our ranges overall are ones in which you as prospects feel are necessary, prestigious, or ones in which there's some perception that you attach to an aggregate class Gmat average, right? So we're looking at the crafting of the class and what that aggregate overall average is. But at the individual level, it's more about, can this person handle the rigor of the program? And then at the individual level, there's lots of different ways to demonstrate your ability to handle the rigor, right? It's not just the Gmat. And so what I tell people is, you need to prepare, you need to practice, you need to be in the right frame of mind to take it during the test. But after that, if you want to retake it, excellent. But if not, move on and figure out where else can you shore up those gaps or demonstrate your aptitude in a different way. There are multiple tests from the GRE. Some schools take the executive assessment depending on the program type that you're actually interested in. They do take the executive assessment. In some schools, you can ask to waive it depending on your academic background. So there's lots of different ways. You can take courses online. You can take Coursera courses. There's all kinds of, HBS has a great kind of three-course curriculum that you can take to shore up your skills. Berkeley does too. Wharton does. There's all these courses that you can take to demonstrate your aptitude. You can go to a community college. I went to Temple University and took a statistics course before I started. So there's all different ways that you can demonstrate your ability to do the work. We recognize that your GPA is what it is. You can't change that. And so look at other ways to demonstrate your ability, especially if I was a French major, so especially if you're a liberal arts major, you've got to be resourceful. But that's where when I mentioned humility and understanding where your Achilles heels are, figure out how you're going to then shore up that gap and demonstrate to the admissions committee that despite whatever the test score is or whatever your GPA was, if it's on the lower end of whatever the ranges are, that you can still, work and do the work and do the rigor and have the rigor that's needed in the program.
Now that's a welcome message, I think, for everybody here. But Gmat score averages have increased by 15, 20 points at many of the schools, certainly the schools on this stage. So an applicant looks at it and says, boy, I look at those averages, and surely they feel that they're going to have to get close to those averages. David, would you add anything on?
If you're preparing now and it's nice and early, then I'd say work hard, give it your best shot, and then this conversation's redundant. But if it isn't redundant and you go through and you've taken it a couple of times, like, no, this is me, this is my level, then you need to, Sherry said, pick out the things that show your quantitative ability. Right now, we're closing the class, right? So we have a wait list of people, some of whom have fantastic GMATs. But I'm thinking, what's missing from the class? What do we need? And it always comes down to an individual level. And it always comes down to who will add the most in the 1.5, 2 years of the program and for 40 years to come. And the later admits actually that we made, the GMAT average ended up being lower. Now, I could have artificially inflated it to be higher to squeeze our average up. Our average is going to be the same as it was last year, I'd imagine. Fortunately, I'm not under pressure to push it artificially. I'm under pressure to make sure that 480 people are amazingly well-rounded individuals who can make a difference in whatever field they go into next. And we're giving the freedom to use the different tools to assess. So prepare, give it your best shot, and then make sure you complete the story of why A, you can pass exams, and B, can add value to the school community.
Right. The Stanford GSB admissions director shared on one of these panels, she said, I have a real problem with Stanford's near 740 average because I think about people that will change lives and change the world. I don't want them to not apply to this school because they self-select away. They see that GMAT score. Kristen, do you see signs of that? Or, how do you convey to people, it's you that we're interested in. Of course, it's an important data point.
Absolutely. So I think we use the word holistic a lot, but it's very true. And when I mentioned in our review process that we look at these different competencies in these different categories, that's why we highlight that, because for every strength, there's a weakness, and we want you to sell us on your strengths. And we know that many times those strengths can overcome something that can't be changed, like a test score, like an undergraduate GPA. You've already graduated. There's not much you can do about that now, but there are things you can do about that in other aspects of your profile and showing us in other ways. So I think that's what we tried to say, is that number is a number, and it, as Sherry said, one data point amongst many. Highlight the others and show us why we should overlook that other data point. And many times we do, because we really are invested in the person and all the other things that they bring to the table.
Right.
You had asked about minimums, and there's usually no minimum, but you have to be realistic, as you had said, right? There are ranges. And so I think many schools are starting to, share their ranges, not just the average, right, not just the median, but the range. And know that in an 80% range, that means there's people on the top and then 10% on the bottom, 10% on the top. So there is room, right? There are people who are in that program who have not the average, but those people better believe they're bringing something else to the table, right? And they really are unique and will contribute and have demonstrated that in their application throughout the experience that they have with the admissions and with the school. And so they may be, the exception, they're not the majority, right? But they exist, right? And so if you fall into that range, you just have to figure out, okay, well, how am I going to really shore up those areas and demonstrate that despite this one little score, right, you need to pick me, right? I should be that one exception. So there aren't really minimums, but it isn't. We do look at it, right? I mean, you want us to look at it. They're in the rankings for a reason. You pay attention to those rankings. It's. I don't know that any of us are happy with the rankings and the way that the Gmat is distributed across those and paid attention to. But it is something that you guys pay attention to. So as long as you pay attention to it, we kind of have to pay attention to it at an aggregate level. That's why I say there's an aggregate level that we have in the back of our minds as an admissions committee. But there's also this individual level where that's where we're crafting the class. We want the diversity in the class.
Right.
Can I just add one point, Matt? This year, this intake, my favourite, I shouldn't have favourites, but my favourite incoming student has a 600. I told him, I wish you didn't have a 600, but you've still got a great background. He's a medical doctor who wants to stay in healthcare. He will make a big difference in the world. My second favourite has a 780 and does something far more straightforward and familiar in terms of the banking consultant and engineering categories. By the way, we need you guys, so don't think we're only after diversity. We always do this. We always talk about the teachers and the people who've done different things everywhere. The core of our class are the traditional people who do MBAs. So I'm not trying to say everything all at once, but
Yeah. No. And in all of that, Jim, it's easy to dilute the importance of a letter of recommendation. Well, of course, they'll say positive things about me. They'll tick all of the boxes at the top end of the range. But a powerful letter of recommendation can make a world of difference, can't it?
It's a tough question to answer. We do ask for references, and I think in 98% of the cases, the reference does just confirm the good things that you have already shared about yourself. What's sometimes interesting to us is to look at who you chose, because sometimes that tells us more. There may be a question of judgment there, or the things that stand out if the recommender is rating everything high, but there's one thing that they rate a little bit different, even though it's still high. That may make us take a look at that and compare it to our impression of that quality through our interaction with the applicant. Having a good recommendation is certainly, or recommendations depending on how many the school asks for, is certainly positive. It doesn't necessarily take someone who is not competitive in other ways, and because the letter is so strong, flip it in the other direction.
Right.
I mean, in truth, for us, it's probably not one of the more important parts. It's valuable, but not one of the more important parts of our process.
Kristen, you were describing that your team is reading perhaps 50 applications a week, and so you have this experience of knowing what a consultant or an investment manager does as a day job, and that's reflected in the resume. So what is the opportunity in a recommendation? What are the insights and perspectives that you would then love to discover in that part of the letter?
Definitely. So our recommendation, and I know some of my colleagues maybe have the same questions because there are some common questions that are asked, ask for very specific examples. So it's not just a list of day-to-day responsibilities, it's highlighting the accomplishment that you had and what you actually did in that accomplishment. So a resume might give us a bullet point of here's the accomplishment, here's the quantifiable results, whereas the recommendation letter can expand on that and tell us really how did you accomplish that, what were the steps you had to take, who did you have to influence along the way, and how did you go about doing that. Our questions also ask for an area of improvement or a piece of critical feedback that person may have given to the applicant, and I think that's also very telling in both directions. Sometimes it can be a bit of a red flag, and I will say our recommenders are very honest, and I would like to agree with you on professional judgment because there are some recommenders that do not tell us great stories about the applicant or tell us very much. If that person chose the CEO, for example, thinking that was going to make us excited, but the CEO only met that person in the elevator, had coffee with them on one occasion, and their letter is very short, it doesn't give us that picture, that story of what that person has actually done. But I think the example of critical feedback is in that same situation, that it can highlight an issue, or it can highlight an issue and then say how the applicant has addressed that issue. And I think that also helps us and goes a long way in seeing this is someone who realizes they are humble, they know that they have strengths and weaknesses, and they're actually trying to work on those weaknesses and make improvements. So that also really helps us in the process.
And of course, please, Jim.
And I think with that point in mind, because a recommendation that has some rich examples is going to be more powerful, don't make any assumptions that your recommender is going to remember everything about you. You want to start the process with them very early. Give them plenty of time, because that's one piece of the application process that once you ask them to write it, you've lost control. And you have to hope that they get it in on time. But take them out for a cup of coffee, share your resume with them, and maybe have a little discussion to remind them of some of your accomplishments or things that you might hope that they share in the examples. And you will likely get a more powerful letter that way.
Now, if you've only joined your recent employer 4 months ago, it's delicate to ask a recommender and talk about business school plans already. What about in the scenario where the recommender says, I'm busy, but why don't you write the recommendation? I'm sure I'll be, comfortable with that, and I'll sign it. Can you tell when applicants have written their own letters of recommendation? Can you tell?
Yeah.
And how does that come across?
I mean, similar language, as their essays, similar word type. And, it really shouldn't do that. I mean, that's, to Kristen's point, find the person who's willing to make the time. And if you ask them, hey, are you willing to write me a positive recommendation? And do you have the time to? Maybe that's a better way of phrasing it. Do you have the time to write a positive recommendation? And if they hesitate in any slightest, move on, right? Because, give them 2 to 3 months, right? And invite them to do it 2 or 3 months ahead of time. Like Jim said, take them to coffee, let them know all the different things that are about you, refresh their memory. Give them an early deadline, right? A deadline before the deadline that you have to really have it submitted, right? And then continue to follow up with them. Make it easy so that they can write it for you, because there's never an appropriate time for you to write the recommendation for your recommender. And if you have to, that means you haven't chosen the right recommender.
You've possibly given us the ideal segue for my final question, which was of the classic mistakes, and you touch on that one for recommendations. David, you might have something to add on recommenders, and can then embrace my final question of the classic mistakes that you see that this audience can avoid.
So just final thing on recommendations, as well as giving them notice, give them the advice that not to write too much or too little. I don't really mind if it's coming from a very busy, especially the Brits, they never write much. 1 or 2 liners, fine, but if I get pages, I'm like, I've got to read all that. That's not good. It's not in your control, but you can advise them. In terms of things that, clangers that you shouldn't do in your application, leave your markup comments from where someone's giving you advice. That's not great. We know that you get advice. You should be asking for advice. You should be asking people to take a look and say, hey, does this reflect me? Does it make sense? Thanks very much. They shouldn't be writing it for you, but when we see markup in terms of suggestions or replacements, it's going to put us off quite a bit. Get the obvious one, getting the name of the school wrong, but the main theme behind it is showing that you care about coming to our school and you're giving it the respect that we deserve and that you deserve as an applicant. So mistakes are a reflection on how hard you've thought about it and how much you want to come to a school. So don't make mistakes.
Right. Now, obviously, ABBA and knowing all the lyrics to Dancing Queen helps, but Jim, anything that we should avoid, some of those classic mistakes?
Just remember that spell check doesn't replace careful proofreading. Spell check is a wonderful thing, but it doesn't catch that applicant who I love, and I'm reading their essay to Kelley School, Indiana University, that ends with, and that's why I am so interested in attending the University of Michigan. It's like,
and it does.
Search and replace didn't work there.
and you do see that.
Oh, yeah.
We joke about it, but you do see that every year. Amazing.
Because I think especially the first essay question that many schools ask, it's often somewhat similar, asking about goals, and so I know there's that tendency to cut and paste and edit. but you're going to serve yourself well to start from scratch and take a look at the nuances of each school's question and make sure you haven't mentioned other schools in your application to yet another school.
Sherry, one classic mistake. Can you limit yourself to one?
I feel like you've taken all of the good ones. Oh, you know what? I will. This is a mistake not having to do with the application, but the process. So, be very respectful of everyone that you interact with throughout the process. So we definitely have had incidences where we have folks come to campus and they're perhaps not as respectful of our front desk staff or other staff members on our teams, and everyone counts. We're all human beings. We all, we call this the admissions. We don't call this the deny office, right? It's, it's all about, we're not gatekeepers, even though it might seem so at times. We're admissions, right? We want to admit you. We want to help you achieve your goals and aspirations. And that's not just myself and my colleagues here on the panel. It's every single person from the operations coordinator who reads your applications to the front desk who greets you. And so that is a huge mistake and can actually really impact decisions in the committee if we get wind that you've been disrespectful.
Right, and that etiquette, which extends to interviews as well, sort of following up. So, Kristen, this is the last piece of advice for this audience, and it better be good.
So I'm very excited because my advice hasn't been shared yet. So my piece of advice is to read and follow the directions, and that sounds very simple, but I think those who do not, we are really concerned as to why. So one example, I know Jim talked about everyone that asks different questions. It's very tempting to try to reuse, but it comes across that you haven't really answered the question that one school is asking, and we ask it for a reason. It's because we're looking for specific data, or we have a specific trait that we're looking to see displayed. Other individuals, they have an agenda, and they have an example, and that's the example that they want to tell us, and they're going to use that essay question to do whether or not it really answers the question. Again, my concern then, when I'm reading your application, is do they just not have an example of that trait, so they just decided not to answer it? Or are they, again, not following the directions? That's a different red flag. If I ask you for a 1-minute video, please don't submit a 5-minute video. Again, that's a question of judgment, of why did you choose to not follow the directions that were given. So really be mindful of what each school is looking for, what each application is asking for. There's a reason, as I said, why it's asking what it's asking, and it's in your best interest to follow the directions and answer the question or do what's asked.
We called this the Admissions Director Panel for a reason, and not the Denial Director Panel. And I hope that the degree of insight and experience that was shared in the last hour will really help all of you as you put together applications. Do make the most of having so many schools here asking those questions and getting this degree of feedback. And I'd just like to thank the four of you for such a wonderful and insightful panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the questions that was asked ahead of time that we included in this, talked about the schools, what their DNA, their personalities, what does make them different. So we move into the next panel, the Dean's panel, and of course deans have visions for their institutions. So John will be, I'm sure, asking some very feisty questions of the deans of Yale, Darden, and the next group up. I think we have to probably hand them the microphones, but we hope that you'll stay for the next panel. Thank you. John?